Welcome to the Look-See for February 2025. We are riding the wild horse of change, and it's been quite a ride these last few weeks. I was working on the Look-See on Saturday, February 8th, but I was also doing laundry, cleaning house, running around, and I didn't get very far with the Look-See. So when I was finally climbing into bed about 1 o'clock in the morning, I shot this quick message to my ET friends saying, why don't you wake me in the middle of the night with some information for the Look-See? And then I fell asleep. At 3:33 a.m., I was awakened by something and heard a voice say, do you still want that information for the Look-See? I was not at all certain that I wanted anything except more sleep. But since I had asked for it, I said, yeah, sure. And I reached for my paper and pen, and then I laid back down again because I didn't think anything interesting would really be said. And that was not the case. Even though I was already drifting into sleep again, I heard a sharp voice say, Mexico. And that got my attention. So I sat up to write it down, and the scene started to roll. I was busy writing for more than an hour. So the first 22 items that follow here are things that I saw and heard in the wee hours of Sunday morning. Compliments of our friends in faraway places. So there's a lot about governments this month. So let's begin. Number 1, along the Mexico border, Mexican troops engage, and a few shots are exchanged between the troops and the cartels. A group of people are taken prisoner by the cartels who want to use them as bargaining chips. One of their goals is that they want certain people released from prison, but the bigger goal is to establish territory for themselves where they can run their business. I've had the impression that their business is mostly drugs and trafficking of slaves and children, so I can't imagine anyone establishing a legal territory for that kind of nonsense. But maybe they have other goals. I will say that anyone establishing any kind of community or territory, organization or state will have a lot of lessons and will end up dealing with exactly the kind of people they used to be. Number 2, I saw these red spots everywhere, and then I realized those were red spots on skin, and I was aware of an outbreak of some kind. I thought it looked like measles. And maybe someone was trying to make a big deal out of it, but most people were ignoring it. So don't freak out, guys. Number 3, there was a breakthrough in science that had to do with a colon. Not much more information was forthcoming, but I wondered if it had to do with a cure for cancer. I also had the impression that this breakthrough was something that had been known for a long time. And maybe this was more of a leak from a whistleblower. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Number 4, the bond market has an earthquake. A big shakeup occurs in the bond market, sending shock waves in every direction. Now, I didn't see any other indicators about money supply, currencies, stocks, cryptos, or derivatives, but I had the feeling that the bond earthquake was the start of something slow-moving and relentless that would affect everyone in the nation, even other nations. Number 5. Israel suffers some kind of defeat. It looked like a pretty serious defeat, or loses something they really didn't want to lose. I thought it was a piece of land, but I couldn't see exactly which piece of land this was. I thought it was the land they were standing on. Turkey was involved here, and it looked like there was a lot of scrambling around to prevent the fighting from spreading any further. Number 6. I saw what looked like an advertisement for guards, security guards, at Guantanamo, as if they were seeking to hire quite a few people, as many as 200 guards. At the same time, it looked like a lot of illegals were leaving the U.S. They heard that people were not being returned to their country. They were being taken to Guantanamo and imprisoned. So people were fleeing. They were hiding from the authorities, and that turned out to be a big mistake. As soon as they tried to hide from those who wanted to deport them, they officially became fugitives who were not cooperating with the law, and they ended up being among those being sent to Guantanamo. The hard decision. Number 7. The month of June brought some very good weather, and people in many places were enjoying it. And then I heard the words, "The weather is going to be very bad for Zelenskyy." With the comment about Zelenskyy came the impression that this did not refer to the actual weather, as in sunshine, rain, temperature, wind, etc. I had the impression of mental and emotional weather being really stormy for Zelenskyy, and he was trying to make a deal, as if he were dealing for his life. So as I thought about this information, I was struck again about the importance of being honest, ethical, and loving. I don't think Zelenskyy has even a slim chance of being able to claim that he took an honest or ethical approach to managing Ukraine. And I always wonder why some people are willing to let themselves be used for such dishonorable games and goals. It never ends well. Number 8. I saw more volcano activity, both underwater and above. In last month's Look-See, I wrote that I saw a volcano with lava running down the sides and into the water. I actually saw several volcanoes, including 1 or 2 that were underwater, but I wasn't sure that I was seeing that correctly, so I didn't mention it. This month, it was quite clear that of the 5 volcanoes I was seeing, at least 3 were underwater. I know Santorini is rumbling over there in the Mediterranean, and I hope the people there are getting out of the way. Mother Nature usually gives us a lot of signals that she's shifting land around. Pay attention. Those signals, those are warnings. Number 9, Germany is in disarray. I had a brief rolling picture of the entire country over the coming year or two, and the whole thing, the whole country, seemed to have collapsed onto people who were paralyzed under the rubble. I thought that was symbolic, and the impression was that the Germans were not going to take any action to reorganize their government or their financial system. They were just going to let it come down. That looked like a big mistake, because then I saw fights between the German people and the immigrants who flooded their country a few years ago and were still there. There were protest marches, but there was not enough government left to respond to the marches. Then there were fires in a few places, including Berlin, and there were quite a few areas that ended up adopting a Muslim-based governance structure. I was really sad when I saw that, not because I think the Muslims are bad people, but because adopting a theology-based government is a step backwards in terms of an evolving consciousness. It is difficult to evolve and take full responsibility for your life when a very controlling set of church rules is in place. Number 10, Canada is in uproar in the last half of March. I couldn't see why, but I had the feeling it had to do with Trudeau, and I wondered if he stepped down. Back at the beginning of January, he announced that he was going to resign. So maybe he finally stepped down and that's what created the uproar. Or maybe he changed his mind and was announcing he was not going to step down. Anyway, I thought the Canadian borders closed temporarily for reasons that had to do with national security. It was temporary, but still, it was kind of upsetting. Number 11, the California high-speed rail project being built from Los Angeles to San Francisco, California, is never going to be finished. The original plan was to build it along the right-of-way of Interstate I-5, but then somebody decided they wanted to build it right through the Central Valley. This decision slowed everything to a crawl and eventually to a halt. In order to get ownership of the needed land, they had to get the state involved in declaring eminent domain. It also took a lot of time to find people who were willing to sell and then work out deals with them and draw up contracts, which then caused the original budget to expand exponentially and the timetable to become absolutely meaningless. So I think one of the many lessons from this project is that outside oversight is really, really necessary to keep big public projects in balance at every level, physically, financially, time-wise, and relationship-wise. You know, common sense has a chance to work when we set things up wisely to begin with. Number 12. This information here started with seeing a piece of a wing, an airplane wing, that looked like it had broken off and fallen to the ground. I started looking around to see where the rest of the plane was, and that's when I saw that there are a shocking number of accidents and near accidents over the next few weeks and months. Planes, boats, trains, and bridges, trucks included, all are problematic. Then air traffic started to slow down, but it kept slowing down to the point where very little was moving. Maybe people were just enjoying a slower pace of life, or the rat race was ended or ending, but it was more like everybody seemed to be in a state of paralysis or maybe shock. Heads up there. Number 13. This was a bit unexpected, but over the next year, I saw Ryan Hall, the weather guy, Ryan Hall, y'all, kind of guy, and Redacted with Natalie and Clayton Morris become mainstream news outlets. Not that they were hired by a big television network, but just that they were the go-to sites for a lot of people, a lot. There was also a feeling and an observation that the big networks weren't there, or they had shrunk. A couple of them looked like they had shrunk to become something akin to advertising agencies. Wow. It's like, whoa, am I seeing this correctly? Number 14. People in Washington State and Oregon were seriously unsettled due to political concerns and worries about earthquakes. I did not like what I saw here because I have family in both of those states. There was something of an exodus away from the coast, but real estate was in the toilet, and people were not finding many options for renting or buying. So those leaving the coast were looking for places that were more stable, both in terms of relationship to the US government and in terms of solid ground that was not likely to serve up a tsunami or shake apart their bridges, roads, and big buildings. Number 15. The problems that France is having with Africa continue to expand. France is being evicted from everywhere, and their finances were falling off a cliff. I am not an expert in international politics or finance, but the African countries pushing them to leave create a big hole in France's financial pockets, and money keeps draining away. They have gold, but it looked like they acted like they didn't know what to do with it, or maybe they didn't want to use it, or maybe they didn't want anybody to know that they had it or how much they had or something like that. So it looked like Macron was on the chopping block, and people in the countryside were organizing in ways that acted like they were deciding to ignore the government and take matters into their own hands. It was messy. And to be honest, from my point of view, watching things go on in France over the last, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years, like they have been in a, the people in the countryside have been making their desires and where their limits are known in every area. So with what I saw in Germany and now in France, it looks like Europe is headed for a pretty difficult year, much like the US. Number 16. Speaking of people ignoring the government, France was not the only place where this kind of ignoring was happening. People in the US were not just ignoring the government, they were actively going around it. Some were setting up their own kingdoms, drawing up paperwork, designating leadership, and deciding on their own money and rules. Everyone else was dealing with some level of chaos and confusion. They were looking for someone who would tell them what to do, who to believe in, or where to find security and sanity. It looked like hardly anyone was going to work. Nobody had any money, and no one had any ideas for getting their lives on any kind of track that made sense to them, offered some security, or brought them what seemed like a reasonable path into the future. We're short on ideas, people. So for a couple of years now, we've all heard every kind of warning imaginable regarding money and banks, from move to a local bank, put your money in a credit union, or the big banks are going to issue crypto, or crypto's a scam with nothing to back it, to, oh, they're all going down, to the Fed is taking over the world, to BlackRock is taking over the world. So there are so many conflicting predictions out there that it's nearly impossible to see clearly what will happen. However, my feeling is that something unexpected will happen due to ideas from some very young and generally unknown sources. And what we will see is some combination of all of the above. So anyway, back to what I was seeing regarding government and the general confusion and loss of security, along with loss of jobs and money. To be honest, before seeing this, I thought many more people were prepared for the financial system to come down and the US to shrink into near nothingness. I thought most people were aware of what was coming and had put some thought, some energy, and time into how they would handle such a situation. Now, I'm not sure. Maybe there were only a handful of people creating all the chaos that I saw. And maybe the majority were doing okay, but it looked like we lost a lot of people. If there's anything I could say about the rest of this year, it will be necessary to develop a whole new strategy for living. Let me repeat that. It will be necessary to develop a whole new strategy for living. So don't wait to think about this. It's not possible to be creative when stress hits and you end up in fight or flight mode. That's a brain state. Shuts down access to all of your creative ideas. So be creative now. It's not too late to take a few steps that will make a big difference in your life if you are forced to take charge of your own life and your own future. And don't worry about money and paying the bills. Especially don't worry about credit scores. It was obvious that the money system was going through some big changes right along with all of us. So instead, focus on understanding what is happening, how to roll with those changes, and who you would trust. And then, what do you need to have on hand in order to stay warm, dry, and well-fed? And keep in mind, luxury is not a necessity. Number 17. Continuing on with government. From now until the fall, there is frantic talk in DC about money. The bubble is bursting, and that's the DC bubble, I would add. And the people of DC who thought they were insulated from what was happening to the rest of the population are terribly upset. It looked like before we ever got to the end of this fiscal year, a few things had shut down here and there. As I watched the two sides, Democrat and Republican, it looked like a Mexican standoff. So the Democrats were refusing to agree to things like the budget, Trump's cabinet picks, or the signing of legislation. And Trump's attitude was, fine, we will just shut things down at a faster rate. So by the end of the fiscal year, a lot of programs that had been dishing out money were gone. The people who were being paid with that money were out of work. And blame was flying in every direction. Earlier in the year, the federal government had shut down a few things, then a few more things, and by September, October, more and more was being shut down. Some people were fighting and suing over the loss of these programs. Others were fighting the Democrats or the Republicans. Some were going after people who took the money fraudulently, and some were fighting with leftover illegal immigrants and gangs. The whole nation was breaking apart. Order was not easily found anywhere. So people realized that the swamp had been holding the whole country together, using payola in every direction to keep people quiet and in place. Hardly anyone realizes that it is the United States of America corporation that is breaking up. And that's a sad lack of realization, because the people never reconstitute the republic in its old form. Trump maintains continuity of government as the U.S. corporation breaks apart. And it looks like that COG group, Continuity of Government group, helps to reorganize and hold the new, look like a federation together until it stabilizes. It looked kind of like a new form of United States of America. Number 18. I saw Syria also breaking into pieces and heard the message, the Balkanization process continues. I just want to remind people of something I've said in the past, but it bears repeating. The powers that want to be are working hard to break up the big nations, taking them apart and reducing or eliminating their ability to establish a gigantic military industrial complex that can take over the world or challenge the new world order. Heads up here. Even if those people and non-governmental organizations that are trying to break up the big nations are caught and stopped, they've already created so much momentum and division among us that I don't think the breakups can be stopped. Number 19, education in the United States shatters. This does not happen in the next month, but it begins and doesn't stop. Trump has talked about taking apart the Department of Education, and I like that idea. That department was not established until 1980. And I spent almost 20 years as an educational consultant. I know what they were doing. Anyway, let me repeat, Trump has talked about taking apart the Department of Education, and it looks like this happens. The challenge of educating people goes back to the original states, but that's where it really falls apart. School districts just do not have enough money to get the job done. Various states attempt to increase school taxes to cover the shortfall created by the lack of federal money, but people fight those increases, and many just out and out refuse to pay. Worse, there's an accompanying drop in the number of school children because the birth rate has dropped precipitously. And many children got sick and died after getting the vax. The states in the South that have had big increases in population as people move to warmer areas are especially stressed. They have this whole influx of people, and they're not ready for that. So this results in independent freelance teachers popping up everywhere. And I'll just say, I have been seeing this for years, and now it's actually beginning. Number 20, a papal announcement or edict, something of that sort, some kind of announcement, comes from the Vatican regarding finance and the number of church members, something about money and the people who still go to church. It looked like an announcement regarding the closure of maybe certain churches or the retirement of some bishops and cardinals, or maybe both. The combining of some dioceses into one and the limiting of funding for a lot of ordinary church expenses, and even the sale of some church properties was part of this announcement. Looks like they're consolidating bishops and cardinals and dioceses and limiting the number of properties they have to take care of. So in the background of all the church information, the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization were gasping. And I wasn't sure what the connection was or is between the Pope and the WEF or the WHO, but I mention it because it was part of this entire piece of information. And sometimes I leave things out only to get a deeper understanding later and then wish I had said all of what I saw. So somehow that announcement that papal announcement really upsets the WEF and the WHO. Number 21. This next vision was quick and surprising. In it, Putin laid a sword on a table and picked up a pen. I can only speculate here, but the impression was that the war in Ukraine was either on hold or over, and an agreement had been reached or was about to be reached. So I wanted to get up and dance when I saw that. It's like, oh, yes, all those poor young kids dying. Oh my gosh. Number 22. This was the last piece of information that I saw as part of the 3:33 a.m. visions. So in this, I saw a very large oval table in a very formal setting. There were at least a dozen world leaders at the table in a secret meeting. And actually, the meeting was known about, but the subject of the meeting was not what the public had been told. The real reasons for the meeting was that these leaders were trying to save or maintain their countries and cultures in the face of a serious financial threat and something to do with ETs or off-planet people. The threat was coming from big corporations. That's the financial threat, I think. Was coming from big corporations like Amazon, BlackRock, Fidelity, and others that I did not recognize, other corporations I did not recognize. I'm guessing here, but maybe the big corporations could threaten to move to another country or cut workers or cut pay or pay out bribes that coax key people to do things that run counter to the governments and their laws. All of this would undermine the security and stability of a country and make their legal structures irrelevant. The ET part of this was connected to the big corporations as well. That connection wasn't clear, but I could speculate here. For many years, I have seen that some of the big corporations are already engaged in interplanetary trade with people from off-planet. Shall I say that again? Some corporations are already engaged in interplanetary trade with ETs and off-planet, with big corporations that are already engaged in interplanetary trade. So, are the governments of Earth trying to find a reasonable approach to dealing with corporations and ETs when those corporations and ETs are much stronger in terms of technology and weaponry? Wouldn't this be similar in some ways to the emergence of a terrorist group or a new country that simply must be dealt with because they're there? So perhaps there are other factors involved in the secret meeting, but the mood of the leaders at the meeting was pretty serious. So number 23, we are certainly seeing the end of politics as usual, but it looks like we're headed into a period of time in which we will need some form of common agreement regarding how to live together. After all, that is what governance comes down to. Agreements on how we wish to live together help maintain security and order and fairness among us. So it's been a really sad state of affairs to have put up with a cabal and to witness the injustice and the hypocrisy they live by. I can't say we are seeing any cracks in the elites, mostly because they keep themselves well hidden. But they are not the ones we should be focused on at the moment. While keeping an eye on what's happening around us, we must focus on ourselves, our healing, uncovering more lies and corruption so we know the real score, and then finding ways to come together and heal. Many years ago, the Robes said the U.S. would break up. And for 45 years, I have alternated between fighting that idea and worrying about, how that could possibly happen, and then worrying about how I would manage in such a big change. So I'm finally beginning to see exactly how that breakup would happen and why. It's not pretty, but it is manageable. Remember that. It is manageable. Number 24. This actually was up among the 22 things that I saw, or 23. There was originally 23 things that I saw in that early morning visual spree. But I saw a cat story going viral. And so that's not something I would usually look at or report on, but I have seen a few cat videos, some that made me laugh and some that made me want to cry. But this one looked like a cat saving someone. Since it came up, I thought I would put it here. In fact, I wondered if the universe was trying to add a touch of humor to everything I was seeing, because a lot of the stuff I was seeing was really pretty heavy. So, maybe they were trying to add a touch of humor in the same way that I occasionally tell people, go watch cat videos and laugh when they need to de-stress. So I put it in here. It's like, well, can't hurt. Number 25. The end of Social Security came up as I was looking at the financial scene. Those who have planned to live on their Social Security income should begin planning other sources of income. We often don't want to do this planning because we feel that Social Security is owed to us. Why do we feel that way? Not just because they took that money out of our account and said we could have it later. The big reason, the real reason, is because we bought into the idea that if we spent the best years of our life doing something that we really didn't want to do, then we could retire at 65 and do what we really wanted to do. And maybe have 20 years more to enjoy doing what we want to do. With a little savings, a pension, a paid-off mortgage, and some Social Security money, we could get by. But what happens when the paid-off house burns down and the insurance company has pulled out of fire insurance 6 months before the fire? What happens when you discover the pension fund was mismanaged and you aren't going to collect what you counted on? What happens when the banks go belly up and your bank accounts are emptied in a bail-in process? What do you do when the government collapses and Social Security goes with it? We have a shift taking place. Not just a shift of industry or technology, but a paradigm shift, a big paradigm shift, a total paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is changing everything. And that is likely to include your Social Security and your sense of security, period. It's time for us to kindle an alternate lifestyle and start practicing self-sufficiency. In the same way that you sometimes had to work 2 jobs when you were younger in order to catch up with the bills or save for something that you wanted, it may be necessary to live 2 lifestyles with 1 leg in what's left of the old world that is still kind of functioning, and 1 leg in the new world that is just taking shape. Now, eventually, you should be able to put both legs in the same world. But for now, if you want to survive and thrive, walking a split path is the immediate future this year. Keep your eyes open and look for new opportunities and the hidden doors that open to those new opportunities. If you are looking, you will find them because the universe responds to each of us personally. Don't forget that. Number 26. In a good sign, the government can no longer have the upper hand to run roughshod over people. Let's talk about civil asset forfeiture and changes in the law. I have a little story to share. I was driving east across Kansas on I-70 many years ago, headed home to Michigan, when I was stopped by a county sheriff. He said I was speeding. I know I wasn't. I tend to be a very slow driver. But at the time, I was young and ignorant, so I said nothing. He said he was going to write a ticket for speeding and that I had to pay the fine right there on the spot. He said it was $50. I told him, give me the ticket, and I said I would write a check when I got home, but he wouldn't hear of it. He said it was $50 cash and he was going to take me to jail if I didn't pay the fine right then. I told him I didn't have $50 cash to give him. I didn't have it because I needed it to buy gas to finish the drive home. He didn't care. We went back and forth, haggling over the $50. And I finally convinced him that I could give him a check right then and there, but I couldn't give him my last $50, or I would be stranded and unable to get home. He then said I had to take the check to the police station so they could determine if it was valid. This was a Sunday afternoon. We were on a very isolated stretch of the expressway. There was almost no traffic. I had no idea where the nearest town was or the nearest sheriff's office. And in 1980, there was no such thing as a cell phone that I could use to call for help from family or friends. Finally, I convinced him to take a check. But he then insisted on driving me to a post office where he watched me put it in the mailbox. I promised I would not put a stop payment on the check, and eventually he let me go. Although I felt this was highway robbery, it was actually a small example of civil asset forfeiture. Civil asset forfeiture allows police and law enforcers to seize property without needing to charge anyone with a crime. And by the way, he never handed me a ticket. I don't know why he stopped me, but I think it had everything to do with an out-of-state license plate. He knew I was a good target. My second introduction to civil asset forfeiture was a few years ago when I consulted a lawyer regarding a renter living on my farm who started growing marijuana, which was then illegal in Michigan. She said she had a license to grow a few plants for medical purposes, but when a little yellow airplane came swooping down on my farm one day, making repeated passes so low that I thought he was going to hit the barn, I started asking around. Turned out the government hired independent pilots to fly over farmlands looking for marijuana being secretly grown. My renter had a number of hidden patches of pot, and the sensors on the plane were documenting that. Anyway, the lawyer put the fear of God into me. He said if the police or the feds came to investigate, they would simply tear the place apart, looking for anything of value. They would confiscate everything of value, including jewelry, every dollar and dime they could find, putting it in their pockets. If they found any marijuana, They would immediately seize all bank accounts and assets, including the house, the land, and accuse me of illegal drug activity. I would be sent to jail for 7 to 10 years. If there was a gun in the house, even if it was a World War II relic, the jail sentence could double. I would lose everything, all of my rights, and maybe when I got out of jail in 10 years, I could sue to try and get my farm back again, which would be unlikely because the feds would have sold it and pocketed the money. Civil asset forfeiture has become a very common way for police to make extra money. Some states have strict asset forfeiture laws that prevent this, but the police found that if they claimed that they suspected drugs were linked to their seizure of people's money or land, they would then turn everything, including the bank accounts and land, over to the feds, who would investigate. And even if they found no drugs involved, they would keep 20% of those assets and return 80% of the assets to the state that called them in to investigate. The police in that state would then keep the entire 80% returned to them, claiming, well, we got the money from the feds. We didn't take it away from whoever once owned it. So the good news is that progress against this blatant robbery was recently made when a Nevada judge ruled against the police, who confiscated the life savings of retired Marine Stephen Lara, L-A-R-A, maybe Lara, after stopping him on the highway for following a semi too closely. This is the kind of injustice that has infected our legal system everywhere. At every level, people are trying to rip one another off. No one thinks about being productive or making money legitimately anymore. It's all fees, fines, schemes, unfair regulations, and pretend you are politically correct. We have some serious cleanup to do. But it's nice to know that at least in Nevada, seizing property as part of a quick and quiet money laundering scheme with the feds is no longer allowed. Number 27. We've all heard the statements, everything changes in 2025. Life will be much different after 2025, and similar assessments of our immediate future. So why? What sorts of change might these people be referring to? I suspect what they are saying is true, but maybe not in the way they are thinking. So let's look at some things to be aware of. A, the government is supporting millions of people with money for food, help with rent, medical bills, and utilities. What happens when the government cuts spending and those people no longer have the money they are accustomed to? B, what about the recent wonderful increase in military signups? What happens when the recruits discover that the myriad of shots given to each enlistee is to turn them into super soldiers and future transhumans? C, who will help the oil companies that race to drill, baby, drill, and end up lowering the price of oil to the point that they're left with little to no profit? D, what options will be available to those whose lives are dependent on serious medication if the big pharmaceuticals come under fire and stop producing some of those needed drugs? E, what about homeless people? F, what about the illegal migrants when their funding suddenly turns off? G, What about the exodus of people from the cities who are looking for homes in rural areas and discover there is no extra housing and there's no funding to build or buy anything? Banks are down. H, what if something happens to Trump? God forbid. I, what do we do with corrupt politicians? That's going to be a hard one, a hurtful one. J, what will the American population do when the whole truth comes out about children being trafficked for sex? What about human sacrifice? And K, we've already mentioned this above, but what if people wake up one day to discover the banks have closed and their money is gone? I know people are expecting something wonderful is going to happen because they elected Donald Trump. I want something wonderful to happen, but we will have a lot of mud to shovel out once the flood of corruption goes down. So get your shovels ready and do a little exercise so you don't have a heart attack when you start shoveling. 28. I'm hearing a lot of complaints about what Trump, Musk, and his cabinet are doing. So maybe these complaints are all coming from the left. I'm not sure where they're coming from, but they surprised me. So I have a little rebuttal to those complainers. Let's look at the reality here in the United States. First, if a democracy gives you a voice in government, how well has that government listened to our voices in the last 4 or 5 years? What about the last 25 or 30 years? Next, how responsive have they been? No, they haven't. It's like we don't exist. Next, how attentive to our wishes have they shown themselves to be? Again, we don't exist to them. Next, how supportive and balanced is the Patriot Act? Have you ever read the Patriot Act? You should read it. Even if you only read 2 or 3 pages, you'll be sick when you read it. Next, how helpful to the people is the National Defense Authorization Act? That's one of those things where, could be good, could be bad, depends on how it's used. It hasn't been used very well. Maybe Trump will do better. Next, how responsible has the government been with our money? Wow. We're seeing the truth about that. Next, how many years have we been sent off to wars that benefit no one except the controllers? Wow. Next, how much corruption has there been? An overwhelming amount. Next, how well have they protected our borders? Okay, not at all. Next, how often has anyone responded to questions about missing children and sex trafficking? Any kind of response. Zip. And last, how can we say we're safe in America when no one in our democratically elected government can explain or do anything about chemtrails, drones, mysterious fog, mysterious fires that start right where smart cities are being planned, fires that are driven by ungodly, unexplained winds, and only burn people and houses, leaving trees and bushes intact? Tell me, how has that democracy been working for us? All you people complaining. Looks to me like it wasn't. Why? Because we didn't have a government anymore. We had a control system working as theater and presenting us with a daily puppet show. We heard all the politicians and elites forever warning against losing our democracy. telling us that we had a precious democracy that needed to be protected and that the U.S. democracy was the light and hope of the world. Maybe we were a light and source of hope decades ago, but I'm not sure that still holds true at all. So Trump and team are certainly creating uproar, and things may not go as well as they or we may like, but we are strong. We are resilient people, and whether things go well or not, whether we hold together or break apart, I'm glad that things are at least moving in a direction other than into the squeeze gates or the FEMA camps. So hang in there. We're not having a crisis. We're having an opportunity. Number 29. I've taken the time to watch some of the proceedings of the Senate, announcements from the White House, and press conferences having to do with the Department of Government Efficiency. And wow, it looks like there was more than a little corruption going on. But to use Elon Musk's and Trump's terms, there were billions of dollars being lost to massive incompetence. I actually like that word better than corruption. Incompetence and fraud. It's clear that no one was minding the store. It was also clear, or is also clear, that the people complaining about Doge and Musk's team are those with their hand in the till. Those of us who run small businesses and have a few employees know that you have to pay attention to the details or the business will run amok. We also know that you can't survive on illusions, promises, or economic fumes. It looks like America has been running on all of these for quite some time. And as things get quiet enough to see and hear the truth, a lot of people are going to be depressed and afraid. Give yourself a few days to feel the full impact of what is coming, but keep your eye on the future and the possibilities it holds. What I see for America as a whole is that we react like an injured animal. When an animal gets hurt, they usually withdraw. They stop eating and they curl up in a corner or a cave or their burrow away from everything in order to heal. When it emerges from its period of healing and isolation, it is lean, very alert and attentive, and hungry. We in America are headed into a period of withdrawal in which we curl up, stop eating, and allow ourselves to heal. When we emerge from that period of isolation, we will be much leaner in terms of both government and population, much more aware and attentive, and very hungry for something new, something good, something that allows us to stretch our muscles and get back in shape. So that's it for this look-see. For those who are watching or listening for the first time, the look-see is a brief look at what is happening in our world and where the big trends are headed. Reality is not fixed. It's very dynamic and it changes according to what we're doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real until we make it real. We make a choice, we take some kind of action, put something together or take it apart. Those decisive actions are what determine the path and the outcome. And of course, once we set something in motion, it takes a lot to make a change or get things going in some other direction. And that's exactly the reason for looking ahead. If you don't like the direction things are going, it's time to make an appropriate change in a timely way, or prepare for what looks inevitable. If we see something we like, we could put some conscious attention on that and help things along. It's important to look ahead and assess what's happening and where are we going, so we know whether or not we need to do something different. So thank you so much for listening. Keep your wits about you, and we'll see you in March. Have a good month. Have a wonderful month.